Throughout the night, we are also going to be turning to our panel of guests for expert analysis, and they are Amy Walter of the Cook Political Report with Amy Walter, David Brooks, columnist for the New York Times, Washington Post columnist Perry Bacon, Gary Abernathy, who is also a columnist for the Washington Post based in Ohio, Mark Short, who served as chief of staff to former Vice President Mike Pence, and Faz Shakir, who was the campaign manager for Bernie Sanders' 2020 presidential campaign. Hello to all of you. Thank you so much. We're going to be spending maybe a long night together. We will see. We'll learn more in the hours to come. I wanted just to kick off this evening, Amy, and start with you with, yes, what are you watching for, but also what is at stake in this election?
Yeah, Judy, it's such a good question in terms of what's at stake, because I think back to actually my own very first midterm election in 1994, and that was a real realigning election. Democrats had held the House for 40 years until 1994. Since 2006, if we start at that 2006 date, the House has flipped 3 times and may potentially flip a 4th. And so we're getting so much change over the course of these past 16 years, and yet it doesn't feel like our politics has changed all that much, right? It hasn't impacted the way that the parties or our politics are working. We've had big events over the course of these last 2 years. We've had COVID, we've had Afghanistan, we've had inflation and the economy. Of course, we have the Roe v. Wade decision. We have a war raging in Ukraine. And yet our politics still seems very parochial and just as polarized. And so that the issue, I think, of what's driving this election, yes, I think we're going to find that inflation, the economy, opinions about the president become the most important factors. And yet all those other big issues that maybe in another era would have had a tremendous impact on the outcome of this election seem to be just sort of bit players.
David Brooks, what are you thinking tonight as
I've read 1,000 analyses of why our electorate has been tied for 30 years, none of them persuasive. And so I don't think we know. I guess what I'm looking for is tectonic shifts. So there's an ebb and flow of midterms and general elections, but there are some things that gradually change across elections. And so one of those has been the educational sorting. People without college degrees going to the GOP, people with college degrees going to the Democratic Party. The Democrats have tried with a lot of spending bills to win back some of those working class voters. We'll see if that works. I think they really need to staunch the flow there. And then the second and maybe most big thing I'm looking at is Hispanic voters. Over the last couple of elections, especially under Donald Trump, Republicans have done better with Hispanics. There have been some polling numbers in the last couple of weeks that show Republicans accelerating those gains. So Hispanics have been a pretty reliable Democratic constituency. Is that becoming more divided?
In just a few seconds, I'm going to ask the other 4 of you, because we're going to hit at the top of the hour. But Faz Shakir, what are you thinking tonight?
Well, I'm jumping right off David's point. I mean, you talk about working class voters. It is the major issue that, to the extent that there are persuasion voters still out there in a highly polarized climate, I do think a lot of them tend to be working class voters, people under making $50,000, $60,000 a year, people without a college degree. Those are people in South Texas. Those are people in Florida, people in Ohio who could determine some of these tight elections. And Democrats on that issue, how do you do it? You make a compelling economic contrast. Did they do enough? I don't think that we did. I don't think we offered what is the next 2 or 3 things that if you kept a Democratic majority, what are you going to deliver for working class people? We talked backwards about accomplishments. We didn't talk forwards about the agenda that working class people could gravitate to, the fight that was posed for them.
Mark Short.
Well, I agree with that. I think that the reality is that the issues that have been dominating the last several months of the election cycle have been inflation, border issues, and crime in inner cities. And I think that the Republicans are on the winning side of those issues. I do think that, one piece is lost. We look at this. There was a data point in your last section that had 28 Republicans or 28 members usually shift in a midterm. But when it's one party control, the number's actually higher. It's significantly higher because Americans like divided government. But I think that in 2020, what's lost is there's so much coverage of the presidential election that Republicans actually picked up 15 House seats, even though we lost the presidency. And so a lot of the low-hanging fruit was already gathered. Still, I think you're going to see a significant night for Republicans tonight.
And Perry Bacon?
What Amy said is so important to underscore it again, is that January 6th and the overturn of Roe v. Wade are hugely important events. but it looks like we're going to have a midterm where the president's party loses some seats, but not a whole lot, which is kind of what normally happens. Maybe we'll see 60 tonight, but in general, the idea that January 6th, sky-high inflation, and the overturn of Roe v. Wade did not really, about 90% of people are going to vote for the same party they always vote for tonight. And I think the calcification, the stuckness, the sort of deep polarization that doesn't move no matter what is a really what's most striking about our politics right now is how little changes even these big events while we all vote for the same party all the time and nothing really shifts.
And Gary Abernathy.
Yeah. Well, I think Perry's right. You know, President Biden has been trying for a long time. The January 6th committee tried over and over again to focus people on January 6th and the danger of election deniers. And the American people, by and large, just aren't buying it. You know, in 2018, to go back and play devil's advocate, no one did a count that I'm aware of how many Democratic candidates did not accept Donald Trump as a legitimate president. Now, Gallup tells us that 56% of all Democrats across the country did not accept him. We didn't worry so much about that election denialism. And I think the American people are saying, you know what, we are more worried about inflation. We are more worried about a porous southern border than we are about the menace that these Republican candidates supposedly pose to us.
So, David Brooks, we could end up spending a lot of time tonight talking about what should have been talked about on the campaign trail that wasn't.
And then people will talk about what we should have talked about.
But Amy Walter, I mean, we're coming down to a lot of this conversation tonight is going to be about what was the messaging and what should or could have been the messaging.
You know, earlier this week, I was talking to a longtime Republican strategist who said, look, the bottom line in politics is you have to play the hand you're dealt. And you do the best that you can with that hand. And I think for Democrats, if we go all the way back to the beginning of 2021, I think they thought they did have an economic message that was going to work. And that was going to be the argument in the campaign. We got past COVID, the economy's running hot, thanks to us, who poured another $1 trillion of stimulus, no thanks to Republicans. Yeah. But that's not what we're talking about, because voters are saying, that was fine, okay, thanks for that check, but I'm paying a lot more money for my groceries now, and that's much more important.
All right, we are going to have a chance throughout the night to pursue every one of these points that you have made. Thank you all for right now.